Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Erev Tov. Welcome to the Menachem Begin Heritage Center. This is the third in our series on the prime ministers that we're calling The Buck Stops Here. This is a series co-organized and generously funded by the government of Israel and the Prime Minister's Office, and we will be continuing in the coming weeks. Those of you who know your history will be forgiven for being a little confused that our third discussion is about Israel's fourth prime minister, Golda Meir. We're not skipping Levi Eshkol, I assure you. We'll be doing Levi Eshkol in a couple of weeks. It was just about the availability of our speakers. Some of you will be watching this on recording or on our podcast, so welcome to those of you listening to the recording as well. We're going to be discussing a prime minister here who I think in many ways is almost, I don't want to say more suitable, but I think is uniquely suitable for an English-speaking audience because she has a place, I think, in the hearts of diaspora Jews, perhaps particularly American Jews, Golda Meir, and we'll be discussing why that might be, but also her storied career as prime minister and before that. And before, in order to learn more about her, we really have, I think, the perfect guest, Professor Meron Medzini, who not only wrote Golda, a political biography, which won the Prime Minister's Prize in 2010, but he was, in fact, Golda Meir's spokesman and knew her personally. In fact, as we've just been discussing, he actually knows all the prime ministers that we're going to be discussing in this series personally. But we're going to be focusing on Golda. But in your questions, if you want to ask, if you have a burning question about one of the other prime ministers, I'm sure he'd be happy to do that as well. Professor Medzini is actually an expert in Japanese history, which he taught at the Department of Asian Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, as well as Israeli foreign policy. He's published a book on Japanese militarism in Japan and the Jews during the Holocaust. He also has researched Jewish communities in East and Southeast Asia. Professor Meron Medzini, it's a great pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
So it isn't always going to be the case that our speakers knew personally the prime minister we're talking about, but that is absolutely the case with you. So perhaps before we get into the specifics of Golda Meir's career and life, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your personal relationship with her.
Yeah. Shalom, everybody. One word about Ben-Gurion. I started my government career 1957 at the Embassy of Israel in Washington as a junior press officer. And then I was appointed head of the government press office here in Jerusalem in 1962, which was Ben-Gurion's last year in office. However, I was lucky that one of my assignments was to make sure that I look after all of Ben-Gurion's interviews with the foreign media. So I did that for almost 10 years. Even after he resigned, I have a lot of mileage on the road to Sde Boker and so on. The point I'm making is this. One of my students at the Rothberg International School one day asked me, "Did you know Ben-Gurion?" I said, "Yes, of course, he was my minister for a year." "Ah, that's very good." He goes out to his buddies and he says to them, "See this guy? He worked for George Washington," which I thought was very nice. Now, I met Golda for the first time, I'm told, when I was 2 years old, which was in 1934. I don't remember that historic meeting. And the reason is as follows. The story goes back to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 1906. two small 8-year-old Jewish girls met in 4th Street Public School in Milwaukee. Their family just immigrated to America, didn't know a word of English. Everything is in Yiddish. And they became lifelong friends until Golda died 50 years later. One was Golda, and the other was Regina Hamburger. Regina Hamburger was my mother. So that makes the connection. For years, they were very close. I remember when Golda was prime minister, 10 at night, 11 at night. Regina, what are you doing? I'm sending the car over. She needed someone to talk to at night. Golda was a night owl. She was at her best at night. And therefore, I remember Golda from the late 1930s, including her husband, children, grandchildren now, her sister, 2 sisters, always with a cigarette. And then over the years, in more official capacity, when she appointed me her spokesman, it was several months before the Yom Kippur War, I came to the office and I said, any special instructions? She said, when we are alone or when there are people from in-house, you can call me Golda. When there are others present, it's either Mrs. Meir or Prime Minister. Seder, anything else? And she looked at me and she said in Hebrew, Al teshaker, don't lie. I said, that's obvious. No question about it. זה לא כל כך ברור. Not that obvious. This is 1973. In many respects, she was an amazing personality. Could be charming, she could be gracious, she could be wonderful, she could be mean, she could be nasty, domineering, opinionated, whatnot. And this is what made her such an interesting personality. I came to the conclusion shortly after she died that it's worthwhile trying to do a bio of hers. And the ones who encouraged me to write the book on Golda were my children, because they knew, Efo Abba, still Golda. Mr. Golda, who is Golda? Why is he there? And therefore I decided at some point, the younger generation of Israelis deserve to know who this controversial figure is. She was controversial most of her life. In many respects, she remains controversial to this very day. So I'm lucky in the sense that I knew the subject that I'm writing about. There are about 50 biographies of Golda. 2 are good. Not mine, by the way. 2 others. One is by an American Jewish historian, I don't know if she's still alive, Francine Klugsbrunn.
Yeah, it came out a few years ago, I think.
A few years ago, it's called Linus. That's first class, it's superb. The other is by Deborah Lipstadt, in a series of Yale University Jewish leaders. That is also very good. It's good because she cites me, so I'm happy. Apart from that, many tried to write a decent Bible. It's very difficult. I'll give you one reason why. Her relations with America. She loved America. For years, used to go to America every year. And the only time she was away from America was during World War II. But after immigrating here, 21, she went back to America, I think already in 29 or 30, and then every year until 38, 48 until shortly before she died. And she loved America, she said, especially Wisconsin. It's a very beautiful state. Anyone who's been there knows. On the other hand, she did not want to live in America. And we asked her once, Golda, did you have any non-Jewish friends when you were growing up in Milwaukee? No, of course not. Did you read the local press, Milwaukee Journal? No. We read the forwards, the Tag Morgen Journal. Were you involved at all in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin politics? Wisconsin being a very liberal, progressive, no, not at all. Were you involved in the elections of presidential elections of 1912, 1916? No, not at all. In other words, they exchanged one ghetto, Pinsk, Odessa, and then Milwaukee. So why did you decide to go? She said, at some point I came to the conclusion that there is no future for a young Jewish girl growing up in America, the beginning of the century. What could she aspire to be? These were the days before, long before Ruth Bader Ginsburg became a Supreme Court judge and so on. She said, you could be a nurse, you could be a teacher, you could be a milliner, you could be a clerk, a sales girl. Then I decided, she said, I'm going to go to Israel. I will help build a new society, lay the foundations for a new country. In the process, I will build myself. And this is basically what she did.
Right. And she moved from the States to Eretz Israel, what was then British Palestine, and she was presumably one of the very few women who reached a kind of leadership position in the labor movement.
Not only the labor movement, in general.
In general.
I think there were 2 women who signed the Declaration of Independence. For years, she was the only minister, member of the government. She herself, incidentally, never encouraged women to be members of her government. Not a great feminist, Golda. And, but what she attempted to demonstrate throughout her life, I am going to show my family, my husband, my immediate friends, who I am, what I'm capable of, that they'll take me seriously. And the first time she decided to take her own destiny in her own hands was when she was 14. She graduated elementary school, did very well. And family then said, get yourself a job. Find a husband, get married, start a family. She recoiled. She said, no way. And they basically said, you can't go to high school.
Wow.
As it were, her sister, her older sister, who introduced her to Zionism and to socialism, Shana, was living at the time in Denver. And Shana wrote a letter, said, come over to us. At the age of 14, she decided to run away from home. And with the help of my mother, one night she lowered the suitcase. My mother caught the suitcase, hid it in her own home. Next morning, early in the morning, she and my mother went to the train station and Golda went off to Denver. 14-year-old girl, 1912. My mother later wrote her a postcard saying there were rumors in Milwaukee that you ran away with a goy. Not only just a goy, Italian. Italian. Probably that was the worst possible. And in other words, she realized that if she insists, she's determined, she is going to get her own way. No one is going to tell her how to conduct her life. Curiously enough, in Denver, she met the man she would marry, Morris, whom I remember, was a very nice man, self-taught. I think he was 8 years older than she. I don't think he even had a job. He was a house painter or something. But he introduced her to music, art, literature. You see, she came from a home that was devoid of any culture. There were no books in the house. Whoever thought of a nice Jewish girl going to a concert or to a museum or to a theater, to a play?
Her family was secular?
Her family wasn't religious, but they kept kosher.
Mm.
And he opened up a whole new world for her. There was a one minor problem. He was not a Zionist, and he hated the idea of immigrating to Israel. Jews don't need a country of their own. And she conditioned her marriage on A, moving to Israel, B, settling in the kibbutz. Even before they were married, that marriage was doomed. And he and her parents, other relatives, always reproached her, said, look, all this thing, the public work that you're doing, this is Narishkeit, nonsense, not serious. And all her life, she tried to convince others she had the right stuff, she could do it, you could entrust her with any job, any position. I'm going to show to them what I'm made of and that I can carry on. And she did everything. I mean, she had virtually every position party and country could offer.
So maybe we'll talk a little bit about some of those jobs that she performed so admirably. One of the great contributions that she made to the state that we actually heard about from a speaker a few weeks ago, Michal Bar-Zohar, who was talking about Ben Gurion, referred to the mission that she went on to the United States before the War of Independence to raise money. And the way he told it was that there was some expectation that maybe she'd raise a few million, and she ended up raising a lot more than that. Can you tell us something about that trip?
Very briefly, in the 30s, no, even before that, Golda is probably the only prime minister we ever had who knew, understood, and underwent a long period of poverty, abject poverty. They ended up in a kibbutz. Marson hated every minute of it. He was gloomy, he was sad, and he threatened her, if we don't leave the kibbutz, we're going back to the States. Going back to the States would have meant total defeat, rejection of everything she stood for. They moved here to Jerusalem, and she was a bookkeeper or clerk in Solel Boneh, which is the construction company of the Histadrut. In the desk next to her was a woman called Rosa Cohen. Rosa Cohen was the mother of Yitzhak Rabin. And Golda said to her, when she handed over the job to Rabin, they had a big argument. What are you arguing about? Whether Golda was the bookkeeper and Rosa was the accountant, or the other way around. She told her, I knew Yitzhak since the day he was born. She was a single parent. She raised her children alone. She never divorced.
When you say single parent, because her husband was absent, or?
They did not live together, they lived apart.
Right.
But she never divorced. Divorce for her would have meant admission, as you were wrong about the man. She was warned, don't marry him. And they never divorced. She had her own lovers later on, some important people. But she suffered through poverty. And that later on is seen by her major contribution to the history of this country, and that is social legislation. If we were decent, we would have called the Social Security, the Bituach Leumi, Chok Bituach Leumi, named after Golda Meir. Our social legislation basically is Golda, from the days when she was Minister of Labor and Construction.
This was under Ben Gurion.
Under Ben Gurion. Right. Now, in the 30s, she rose through the ranks in the Histadrut. She had a very, very good habit of, before taking a new position, she would learn the environment, who does what to whom, who is in charge, what's the purpose of the organization, and then she would see what she could contribute, what she could offer to that position. And I think there was hardly a job in the Histadrut that she did not fulfill. She undertook a national position in July 1946, when the British arrested the leadership of the community of the Shuv, the Jewish community here, after it was called the Black Saturday, and she became the acting head of the political department of the Jewish Agency, fulfilling in for Moshe Sharet. And she became prominent here, and she was beginning to make her mark abroad. At the beginning of the War of Independence, it was early January 1948, Ben-Gurion called in the leadership of the community. Things were bad, very bad. We had partition, the UN voted on partition. It was followed immediately by a civil war here in this country. The British announced that they were leaving. We were still thinking about the riots, the Arab revolt of 36, 39. The only one who was thinking differently was Ben-Gurion. And we weren't sure if the Americans would hang on, would support partition for any length of time, which, by the way, eventually they did not. And Sharet came from New York, and Golda came from Jerusalem. Kaplan, who was the treasurer of the Jewish Agency, said, look, we don't have money. We can't afford to pay for the war. And Ben-Gurion said, I'm going to travel to America to raise money. And Golda said, no way. You are needed here. I will go. And he put it to a vote, believe it or not. And the vote was against him. And she went off. The American Jewish establishment didn't want to see her, didn't want to hear from her. They were not yet fully aware of the idea that within 4 or 5 months, it's going to be a Jewish state. And she had to wrangle her way to the General Assembly of the Council of Jewish Federations held in Chicago, end of January. So she flew from here to New York. Her son was studying in America at the time. He was cellist, he was studying music. And they ended up bringing her somehow to Chicago, and she made an amazing speech, basically saying, look, friends, we are at war. You don't understand. And this war will determine whether we're going to have a state or not. Mm. She made a huge impact. In the first round, she raised $50 million. She thought maybe 2.5, 3, 4. After the state was declared, she went again, another 50 million. She raised $100 million. Somebody calculated that paid for about a third of the costs of purchasing arms for the 48 war. Wow. None of this money ever came here. Went directly went to American banks, who gave us loans, and then went to Geneva and from there to Czechoslovakia, the only country that agreed to sell us arms in 1948. Hmm. No one here knew about her achievements in America. And here is one of the amazing things. The time came in March 48 to select 2 institutions that would lead us to independence. One was called People's Council, 37 men and women, 37 who eventually signed our Declaration of Independence. And of them, 13 would be the People's Executive, provisional government. Somebody jokingly said the provisional government of the provisional state of Israel. Question then facing the Labour Party, who is going to be our representatives? They had 4 seats. Ben-Gurion, obviously, Sharet, obviously Kaplan. Who's going to be number 4? Ben-Gurion said, I want Golda. The party said no. Who did they select? Remez. Who was Remez? One of her lovers. And I remember years later, we talked to her about this. She said, I could oppose Remez. That was probably a major setback. And Gurion then said to her, listen, once there's a government, I will make sure that you're in it. And this is one of the greatest achievements was she drove home to American Jews the message, this is where we need you most, and this is where we're going to create a new miracle, and that is the state of Israel. Mm.
So before we get to her prime ministership, when we talked, those of you who were here last time, when we were talking about Moshe Sharet, will remember that Sharet came in as prime minister after Ben-Gurion resigned for the first time, and then Ben-Gurion returned. And when he returned for his second spell as prime minister, I think Sharet was replaced as foreign minister by Golda. Is that right?
He wasn't replaced. He was kicked out
He
by
was kicked
Ben
out.
Gurion.
Right.
I'm going to talk about it tomorrow. Come back if you want to hear in Hebrew or tomorrow in Beit Berl and have a session on Sharet. She had a very difficult relationship with
She did. Golda had a
Golda.
difficult relationship with Sharet.
He never respected her capabilities. On the contrary, at some point he called her half-literate, chatzi maskelet. How will she dictate a memorandum? How will she give a speech in the UN General Assembly and that sort of thing? Sharet, you heard, those of you who here heard about him. He was an amazing man, highly talented, probably the only member of the founding fathers who had a university education, fluent in 8 languages. A man who engineered our UN partition resolution, our admission to the UN, who built the Foreign Service, the Jewish Brigade. Highly talented man. He doubted seriously her talents, her ability, her capability, her depth. And she felt that the time had come for her. She'd been Minister of Housing and Labor for 7 years. She felt, I've done my share. Time to get on. And she was encouraged by Ben Gurion. The difficult, to this very day, Sharet partly responsible for his own dismissal because he challenged Ben Gurion on certain key issues. And Sharet accused Golda of being non-collegial. How could she take over from me in such circumstances? He noted in his diary that he handed over to her the foreign ministry. They spent 3 days together. He said she didn't make one note. She herself was not sure. She told us that later on, she wrote in her memoirs, I came to the foreign ministry and there I found the staff, Iban with the master's degree from Cambridge, and this one from Harvard, and this one from Oxford, and this one from Sorbonne, and so on. And here I am with 2 years teacher certificate from Milwaukee. But pretty soon she realized that she could do the job, and which she did. But there were always doubts. There was always the uncertainty. Am I doing the right thing? Am I really up to the job? She was beset with these doubts, with these questions. And there were very few people she could talk to, she could consult with. My mother being one of them. Her self-confidence grew when she became foreign minister. She became foreign minister. The first challenge was the Sinai War. She was not happy with the idea. She didn't trust the French. She didn't understand the French. She was not happy about the collusion with the British and the French. She said, you can't trust them, you can't rely on them. she accused Shimon Peres, אתה והצרפתים שלך, you and your French pals.
Right. This is when Perez was very close to the French government.
He was the one who engineered the arms
Right. The nuclear
deals,
yeah.
and later on the nuclear deal with it. But she was a good soldier. Ben-Gurion decided, and she led a mission to France to see what can be done. He came back and told Ben-Gurion, I'm not sure this is the right thing, but not much of a choice. The one who pushed for the Sinai War was Dayan. Ben-Gurion already was then not at his best. She basically led the diplomatic struggle against America and the Russians. Now, those people who talk about Israeli-American friendship and relations since the beginning, not so. The Americans gave us an ultimatum in 1949, kicked us out of Sinai. The Americans gave us an ultimatum in 56 out of Sinai. If not, we'll kick you out of the UN, we'll suspend all economic aid, we will terminate the tax-free arrangement for the UJA money. UJA money at the time was 40% of our budget. A lot of money.
40?
40. Today, fundraising is about $2 billion a year. Then it was a hell of a lot of money. It's 56 German reparations have not yet started coming in. And the Americans gave us an ultimatum in 70, Nixon, to stop the war of attrition. Ultimatum in 73. End the war, and then don't destroy the third Egyptian army. And then we had an ultimatum from Ford of reassessment. And Reagan did something after Begin destroyed the Iraqi nuclear. So with America, Trump is not the first American president to make demands of Israel. The Golda remembered, and this is what drove her foreign policy when she was prime minister. She remembered how we were kicked out of Sinai basically with only one guarantee. And that is, if the Egyptians reimpose the naval blockade over the Straits of Tiran, Israel has the right to self-defense and engage in war. She did not realize at the time that Sinai, in retrospect, gave us the best 10 years in the history of this country. 57 to 67. This is when we built Israel. Hebrew University, Campus Givat Ram, Tel Aviv University, Ben-Gurion University, Port of Ashdod, power stations, railways, roads, national water carrier, Dimona, the nuclear reactor in Dimona.
Because the Egyptian threat was neutralized for those 10 years.
For 10 years, we had, Egypt was out of the game.
Right.
The PLO started in 65. And Golda was foreign minister at the time, and she was part of this. So, but her fear throughout the time of her premiership was, I cannot allow Israel to return territory unless it is part of a written peace treaty negotiated directly between us and the Arabs.
Right. So we'll get to that, but I want to fast forward to her becoming prime minister in '69. So Eshkol dies in office, right? The first Israeli prime minister to die in office.
Look, the saying in Israel at the time was that she was brought in from retirement to become prime minister. The story was totally different. Eshkol was a victim of the Six-Day War, which theoretically he won. He was the prime minister who prepared Israel for the Six-Day War. One of my memories of Eshkol, I worked for him. As far as I'm concerned, apart from Ben-Gurion, who was a class by him, our best prime minister was Eshkol.
That's a teaser for the next session, by the way, on Eshkol.
Story about, is it permissible to tell a story about Eshkol here?
Sure, go for it.
The war, the Six-Day War ended Shabbat afternoon, June 10th, with a Russian ultimatum, by the way. The Russians phoned the Americans and they said to them, you tell your Israeli friends, that's as far as you go. You don't stop, we're coming in. Okay. 2 days later, we went to Eshkol's office. He was preparing his victory speech. He was due to address the Knesset that afternoon. We found the prime minister of the victorious nation of Israel slumped in his chair. Eshkol, ma kara? Ma yesh lecha? What happened to you? And he looked at us, and I'll never forget that. He said, Kinderlach, what are we going to do with all that? And we said to him, what are you talking about? We won an amazing victory. He knew exactly what he was talking about. To this very day, we don't know what we're going to do with all that.
The territory. Right.
Of course. Now, Eshkol, in addition to heart problems, he had cancer. The heart condition we publicized, the cancer we did not. As incidentally, we never publicized Golda's cancer. Although Golda, throughout her term of office as prime minister, every Monday night, she was getting her treatment infusion at the Masharet Institute in Hadassah in Kabul. Every Monday night. Monday night was treatment night. We did not admit, we didn't lie, but we did admit. In the summer of 1967, after the Six-Day War, he was in Switzerland, and the Minister of Finance at the time, Chef, came to see her. And he said, Golda, you'd better prepare yourself. She said, for what? You're going to be the next prime minister. And what are you talking about? He said to her, Eshkol's days are numbered. He's sick. And her response was, you know, as long as he's alive, let's not talk about it. In other words, she knew that 2 years in advance that she was going to be next prime minister for a very simple reason. A, by seniority. B, because the other candidates were problematic. The party did not like Dayan, afraid of him. They disliked Peres for many reasons. They thought Iban didn't have the guts. He didn't have what makes the prime minister. Same applied to Alon. Sapir didn't want the job. It was Golda. Public opinion polls taken before she became prime minister gave her 3%. 8 weeks into her premiership, 80%.
Wow.
Almost like the current Japanese prime minister. In my book, I cited a letter written by a young, I think he was captain at the time, wrote a letter to his parents who were in America. How do you like our new prime minister? Finally, it's a sense there's somebody who knows what he's doing, strong hands at the helm. Who wrote the letter? Yoni Netanyahu, Netanyahu's brother, to his parents. Father was then teaching Cornell.
Wow.
From 3% to 80%. In other words, she knew in advance that she was going to be prime minister.
Right. Was she ready for it, do you think? Did she feel ready for it?
She felt that she was ready, but before accepting, she discussed it with her family. They said, we don't see any reason why not. She discussed it with her doctors. And they said, look, if you live a relatively normal life, which means take an afternoon nap, get your treatment on a regular basis, there's no reason why not. Now, she had, cancer was detected in December 1965. It's called lymphoma, the lymph nodes. But she managed to overcome. And the doctor said, as long as you live normally, don't see any reason why not. And therefore she said, we'll give it a try. Elections were due to be held in October 69. She took over as prime minister in March 69. By October 69, she saw A, that she can handle the job. B, she was at the height of her popularity here and overseas. She had a very good visit with Nixon in September 69. So she decided to carry on. In 72, she at some point said, enough is enough. She gave an interview to an Italian journalist, Oriana Fallaci, I remember. I sat in on that one. And she said, next elections, next year, I'm going to be 75. Enough. I've done my share. And she informed the party, after next elections, I'm out.
How old was she at this point?
75. And in fairly good health. And the party, don't leave us, Gewalt. What are we going to do? And Dayan and Peres and this one and the other one. And she gave in. Something she regretted until she died. Imagine if I would have resigned before the Yom Kippur War. The interesting thing is that throughout the Yom Kippur War, the 23 days of the war, no treatment. Remember, we asked her, aren't you going to Hadassah. She said, imagine if the country will find out that I'm being treated for cancer in the middle of Yom Kippur War.
Wow.
What will they think? Didn't get into it. At the end of the war, he collapsed. Not with cancer, but with herpes zoster. It's probably as painful as cancer. But she lived with cancer for 13 years.
So let's talk about the Yom Kippur War. Obviously, that's what, for better and worse, is what she's known for. How do you remember her leadership during that time? Because obviously, looking back, there's a lot of recrimination, not just her, but the whole leadership class. Not unlike, of course, what we went through, October 7th and the leadership.
No,
then, but
totally different.
But how?
Story.
So I'm interested to hear how it was different. But so, what can you tell us about that period for her?
Her instincts told her something is awfully wrong. Already in March 73, there was an alert. There was mobilization, cost 50 million shekels. The head of military intelligence at the time said nothing will happen, and he was right. So we thought he would be right in October as well. Her gut feeling was something is wrong. She was later accused that she's being intransigent and in many respects she's responsible partly for Yom Kippur breaking out. Wrong. Part of the problem was her expressions, public expressions. I'll explain this in a minute. On a number of occasions, the Egyptians said we're prepared to consider, even Sadat said, a peace situation, provided Israel will give prior undertaking, total withdrawal on all fronts, Golan, West Bank, Jerusalem, Gaza, Sinai. Return of UN force, demilitarized zone, equal distance, both sides of the borders, Suez Canal open according to international law. It says that they can close it in times of war. Tehran open according to a decision by the Court of Justice, International Court of Justice, go get a ruling. Our mistake at the time was, instead of saying, we hear you, fine, we're interested, talk to us. The answer was the usual, we are not going to retreat and not go back to 67. So I had a big argument with the minister who formulated the response, Galili. What do you have to remind them? We're not going to go back to the 67 lines. Sure you do, let them know that they know. Look, the feeling at the time about Golda was, and regret, partly it's true. She became prime minister at the age of 71. At the age of 71, you don't change your views. Rarely does a leader make a massive change. For example, de Gaulle left Algeria. Adnan, Willy Brandt, Mao Zedong, Rabin if you want, Sadat. Ideas that she carried with her for years were there. There was growing disconnect between Golda and the younger generation of Israel. younger generation of Israel, after the Six-Day War, we wanted to have a good time. Education, the apartment, the car, the overseas trip. She was living in the past. And I saw this when she met for a conversation the heads of the so-called Black Panthers.
Charlie Biton.
Pantherim HaShorim. We, stupidly, we didn't prepare for the meeting. We thought she was Minister of Labor. She was Histadrut. Don't have to prepare. They walk in, shalom, shalom, have a seat, have a cigarette, and so on. Where do you work? We don't work. Why don't you work? Because the police is chasing us. And you looked at them and said, when we came here 50 years ago, oppa. The moment they said 50 years ago, I knew that was a disaster. In other words, she was living in the past. And I saw this quite often. I used to go with her to meetings with students at various universities. Total disconnect. But when it came to foreign policy, he was strong, he was tough. The principle that guided her was no experiments. I've been given a task, I'm going to preserve what I can.
She was a status quo person.
No status quo, no experiments. The Yom Kippur War, the day before, she knew something was wrong. I remember we came to the office Friday morning. She walked like a lioness in a cage. News arrived that the Russians were evacuating families from Cairo and Damascus. And she was talking on, Mahem yodim shanachnu lo yodim. What do they know that we don't? And she then authorized the trip of the head of the Mossad to London to meet his Egyptian informant. News about the impending war, the final confirmation was about 4 a.m. She was woken up by her military secretary, came to the office. The day before, she said, no preemptive strike. If we will deliver a preemptive strike, nobody will believe us. And we will need help from the outside. This is the first major decision she made in the war. The second was to decide on the size of mobilization. The Egyptians and Syrians decided to start the war earlier. We thought it would be at 6 in the evening. It was at 10 to 2 in the afternoon. Remember, we were sitting there with a group of ministers. Secretary walked in with a little note. The war had started. Her reaction, by the way, was in Yiddish. Nordos fällt mir aus. That's all I need. And then she said in English, they are going to pay for it. In other words, as far as she was concerned, the war was to restore the status quo. During the war, she made, I think, 5 or 6 major decisions. If we had to have a war, and I think we had to have a war because Sadat decided that there's no other way. Thank God she was in charge and not somebody else. First key decision, therefore, was not to preempt. The second was the call up. The third was to set up a war cabinet, 5 people. Golda, the defense minister, Dayan, Alon, who was advisor, minister of education, Galili, who was her senior political advisor, minister, and the chief of staff, Dado, and their staff. Basically, they took away the conduct of the war from Dayan, which is essentially what's happening here. In this war, Netanyahu took over the running of the war from the hands of the defense minister, be it Gallant or Katz now. Another decision was Syria first, then Sinai. And indeed, within 5 days, Syrian front was more or less taken care of. Another decision was to approve the crossing of the canal, which is due to be held on 12th of October. Mossad heard that Egyptians were planning a counterattack, and the army said, we'll set a trap, and we postponed the crossing of the canal by 3 days, and indeed the Egyptians lost 450 tanks. Canal was crossed on the 12th, on the 15th. Another key decision was to accept the ceasefire, and then to allow the supply, water, medicine, food for the besieged Third Egyptian Army. And basically, she approved the moves that led eventually to return of prisoners, commission of inquiry. Within 3 weeks, she had a commission of inquiry. And you knew when to go, you had a decision. One thing that affected me personally, on the first day of the war, I had a pile of requests from foreign journalists for interviews with the Prime Minister. And I went to Golda, and she said, no way, law. And stupidly, I argued with her. I said, Golda, you're best, you're very good at Hasbara. And she looked at me and she said in Hebrew, don't you know there's a war on? In this respect, I was unemployed as her spokesman during the war. Dayan briefed the editors of the Israeli dailies every 2 days. So I was involved in running the press office, and it's called Senior Conducting Officer of the IDF. We used to go to front lines with foreign media. But I had a chance to see how she behaved. Quiet, calm, collected, 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes a day, Chesterfield, endless cups of coffee, amazing grasp of military tactics, strategy, foreign policy. But after the war, of course, she fell apart. She had herpes zoster, which apparently is very painful. By then, things were taken away from our hands, almost like now. And luckily, there was one man who knew what he was going to do. There were 2, basically. First was Sadat. The second was Kissinger. Now, I want to use the opportunity. At no point in the Yom Kippur War was there any threat to the existence of Israel. No way. partly because the Egyptians said this was going to be a limited war. On the day they launched the war, the Egyptian foreign minister informed Kissinger, we are not going to expand the operations. They never thought of going more than 30 miles into Sinai, to the hills, Midland, Judea. The second canard that I wish to dispel is that the American airlift saved Israel. American airlift started on the day we launched the crossing of the canal, not before. It was very important. 550 flights, 20,000 tons, very important. Also in terms of morale. But that did not save Israel. Israel was saved, not saved, but we never had a threat to our existence. The man who knew exactly what he was going to do was Kissinger. He had a strategy. And he was able to persuade Golda that something is going to emerge out of this. And it wasn't easy, but he finally prevailed. Kissinger basically said to Golda at some point, don't rub Sadat's nose in the sand. Give him the feeling that he achieved something, and he'll talk to you. Basically what happened.
You think that laid the groundwork for the peace
Absolutely,
treaty that Begin would
absolutely.
sign
And this
5
is,
years later?
and this is why she decided to stay on in government. Something was changing. One day, the day we signed the agreement for disengagement of forces, January 18, 1974. It was early, it was snowing in Jerusalem. Kissinger arrived in her home here on Ben Maimon Street, the residence of the Prime Minister, 6 in the morning. And he brought a letter from Sadat to Golda. Prime Minister, I'm glad that we've reached a stage where we're signing this, and through Kissinger, let's make some progress. And she read the letter. Now, think for a moment, here's a letter from Sadat, who delivered a massive blow to us. Within a few weeks, he's writing to the Prime Minister. And she looked at Kissinger and said, how did you get it? And he said, yesterday I was in Egypt in Aswan, and Sadat said to me, you tell the old lady this and that. And Kissinger said to him, why don't you dictate a letter and I'll take it to her. He did. And that moved her because she said, after all, this is, something is changing. She lived long enough to greet Sadat here, although when she heard first time, she said it's a whole canard, it's a hoax. But she was persuaded it'd be a good idea if you go back home and meet him. She did not believe Camp David was the right thing to do.
She was opposed to the withdrawal from Sinai?
Opposed to withdrawal from Sinai, opposed to removing settlements.
Wow.
We set them. We set them. They didn't go on their own.
Interesting.
And how did Begin negotiate it? He didn't have the approval of, how did he sign the Camp David agreement without the approval of the cabinet? The cabinet didn't know. Certainly the Knesset didn't know. But by then it was a bit too late. At some point she realized she would have to go. And I think the event that pushed her in that direction, once a year we commemorate the חייל, טקס לזכרם של חיילים שמקום קבורתם לא נודע. Commemorate the memory of soldiers whose burial place is unknown. It's done on Mount Herzl. Took place in March 74. Pouring rain. And a lot of people there, standing. She's standing there, a soldier holding a black umbrella over her. And Dayan began to speak. And from the crowds, shoutings were heard, Rotzchim, killers, murderers. Wow. For the first time that I remembered, she lowered her head. Golda always looked you in the eye. Lowered her head. She was ashen. She came home. And 2 weeks later, or 3 weeks later, she went to a meeting of the Labour Party faction, and the Labour Party won the elections. They lost 5 seats, but they were still with 51 seats in the Knesset and shared the government. And she said, "Agati l'sof haderech." I've reached the end of the road. Took her handbag, walked out. Nobody stopped her. The only one to accompany her was her bodyguard. Wow. And the next day she resigned.
Wow.
Very sad. The last few years were very, very sad.
Okay, so this has been a wonderful, wonderful exposition of Golda's life and career, and I think we've all learned so much and enjoyed it very much. But I want to give our audience here the opportunity to ask any questions they have. We have a little bit of time. My colleague is going to bring a microphone down. So does anyone have a question? Gentlemen here, we'll just wait for the microphone, sir, so that we can hear and that the recording picks it up as well. Down here, Sarah. Can you put your hand back up so that my colleague can see you? Yeah.
I wonder if you would respond to this. Golda's well-known position. There's no such thing as independent Palestinian Arab identity, and she'd held on to this to the end.
No, she did not.
Okay, so let's get there. Okay.
Well, then, if so, I'd like you to respond. Thank you.
Okay, so just to be clear, if everyone...
There's no such thing as Palestinian people.
Right, this is a famous statement that Golda made in an interview, I believe, right?
I'm a Palestinian, I have a Palestinian passport, and so on. That's true. By the way, I also have a Palestinian passport. The British gave it to me. I go back to the mandate. She was wrong, and it took 2 or 3 years to convince her this is wrong. In April 73, in a speech, she finally came to the conclusion, she said openly, there is such a thing as a Palestinian entity, and that we will eventually have to deal with them. But it's true that for years, she tried to ignore this.
Maybe I could ask actually just on that, because we haven't really discussed it and it wasn't a major part of Golda's time, but the question that would become such a major question as we get into the sort of 80s and 90s of Palestinian state or all those things, is that anything that Golda ever had any strong opinions on?
Not that. As far as she was concerned, for peace, she was prepared to make territorial concessions. By the way, something that probably most of you don't know. On March 1, 1973, she met Nixon, and they agreed that after the forthcoming elections in Israel, due to be held in October 73, Kissinger would come and start a shuttle diplomacy. And she said, for this, I'm prepared prior withdrawal of Israel deep in Sinai, beyond the passes, beyond the Judean. This was never announced publicly, that's true. But she was prepared to make a change in her views.
Interesting. Okay. Question. Yeah, this gentleman here. Just a second.
You mentioned the opposition to some of Golda's policies by the Black Panthers and others. Aside from that, did she ever have to deal with the type of strong divisiveness that we're seeing today?
No, she didn't have to deal with this. Although, believe it or not, she was not religious in any way. She smoked on Shabbat, she drove on Shabbat, she loved Chinese food.
Like any good American Jew, no?
In 56, she was in New York for a long time. And the American Secret Service gave her a bodyguard, a nice Jew from Brooklyn. And we asked Golda, oh, he's a wonderful man. Why? He knows where all the good Chinese restaurants are. During that period, I remember one day they disappeared, she and my mother. Nobody knew where they were. Ben-Gurion is phoning, this one is phoning, people phoning me. I was a student in New York at the time. I had no idea where they come back. Where were you? We went to the movies in the afternoon. What were you talking about?
About divisiveness in society.
She was prepared to allow or to agree that there would be no television broadcasts on Friday and Shabbat and Jewish holidays. The issue at the time, whether we're going to have broadcasts. If it were not for some lawyer in Tel Aviv who drove to Jerusalem on Shabbat, on Friday night already, Shabbat was in, and got an order nisi from a Supreme Court judge who allowed television broadcasts in order to keep her government intact. She was prepared to go that length. By the way, one of her biggest arguments with Ben-Gurion, and she had many arguments, was on television. Ben-Gurion, everything he has done, and his greatest, Golda said, the greatest living Jew, he opposed vehemently the introduction of television here, saying it's going to corrupt manners, it's going to, advertising is going to create demands, and she argued with him. She said, but there's BBC, there's the French problem. Not everything is commercialized. He didn't allow television. Only after he left did we have television.
It's a good thing he didn't live to see social media.
67.
Okay, let's.
sorry. To add one more thing regarding today. Look, it was a different country. Totally different country. Therefore, there's no way you can make comparison between her and, let's say, Netanyahu. Totally different story.
Because different time, different situation.
Different time, different situation, different image. Look, Golda's major achievements, Russian immigration, the opening to Africa, relations with America, the understanding with Nixon on nuclear bombs, the image of Israel. Totally different than what we have today.
Okay.
One story.
Okay.
Her.
While you're telling it, I'm going to ask my colleague to give the mic to this gentleman. But hold your question while Professor Medzini continues.
She was once in America. I remember I went with her. It was a convention of labor union, the AFL-CIO. And she's introduced and she looks around and she says, "Is there anyone here from the Carpenters Union?" And people said, "Why are you asking?" She said, "My father was a member of the Carpenters Union." They all loved her.
Okay, yes, sir.
In September 1973, I think possibly a week or two before the surprise Yom Kippur War, there was a terrorist attack in Austria in the Scharnau transit camp, where Jewish Russian immigrants were waiting to come over to Israel. Did Golda ever make a connection between that event and the start of the Yom Kippur War?
No, there's no connection at all. We thought there was a connection, none. The attack was not on Schonau, the attack was on a train, which brought Russian immigrants to Schonau. Schonau was an Austrian castle which was used by the Jewish agency as a camp. Russian Jews came from Russia, camp, El Al to Israel. We thought there was a connection. And on the way back, she was in Strasbourg, addressing the European, what's it called, the Council of Europe. And on the way home, he stopped off in Vienna to remonstrate with Kreisky, the Chancellor of Austria, who caved in and agreed to close the transit camp in Schonau. We thought there was a connection. There was not.
Okay. Yes, the lady here, yes, with the blue jacket.
First of all, I want to say I'm so jealous. I wish my mother had been friends with Golda.
What did you think?
She's jealous that she wishes her mother had been friends with Golda.
My question is, I've always loved Golda in this distant, close way, and I want to know why she so quietly took the fall for Diane. That's always bothered me.
Why she took the
Why
fall?
she took the fall for Diane.
Why she took the fall for Diane?
Because she was the prime minister. And when you are number one, you are responsible.
The buck stops here, as
Simple as
the
that.
series says.
In this respect, I was in charge. I was number one. The responsibility is with me.
Okay, thank you. This gentleman at the end, yeah.
Thank you for a very illuminating.
Can you hold it a bit closer, please?
Thank you for a very illuminating presentation. It's been outstanding. Thank you. How did you get on with Menachem Begin? And
There was a great deal of respect. at some point in 45 and 46, we had a period here, it was called the period of the Armed United Resistance Movement. The joint operations Haganah, Etzel, and Lechi. And Begin represented the Irgun, and she represented the Haganah. They knew each other. There was a lot of respect. I remember attending some meetings between her and Begin. There was respect. Above all, she disliked his style, but it was nothing personal. There was enormous animosity between him and Ben-Gurion.
Right, that we know, yeah.
Ben-Gurion, I don't know if Vicky Varzor told him that Ben-Gurion never addressed Begin as his name. That member of the Knesset sitting next to Badr. But Ben-Gurion's description of Begin was he's a clown. Mukyon, Leitzan, not serious. Golda never did that.
She had more problems with people in her own side sometimes, right?
Oh, okay.
Abba Eben, for example.
Eben, she basically emasculated and did so in a very simple way. Nixon disliked his Secretary of State, William Rogers. She disliked Eben for years. Look, totally contradictory. The man spoke. He was one of the most brilliant orators on earth. I was once lucky to hear, it was the Hadassah conference or something, two of the best English speakers in the world at the time, Abba Eben and Adlai Stevenson. Eben had a vocabulary of 37,000 words. And Golda, or Eben once said about Golda, she has a vocabulary of 500 words. Why does she insist on using only 300? And what she did eventually was she and Nixon decided they're going to bypass their foreign secretaries. So the chain of command was Nixon, Kissinger, Rabin, who was ambassador in Washington, Dinitz, Golda's political advisor, Golda. No Eben, no William Rogers.
Okay, let's have one last question. Yes, the gentleman here. Sorry for anyone else that had their hands up. Yes. No pressure, make it a good one.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you very much. Very enlightening and captivating to hear about your experiences. My question is as follows. Comparing Israel during the time of Golda Meir and based on your amazing perspective, whether it's economic, militarily, socially, is Israel stronger or weaker today?
Much stronger. Much stronger.
In every sense.
Every sense, science, technology, high-tech, medicine, agriculture. Look, if you would have asked me on Friday, May 14, 1948, that within 60 years, Israel is going to be the third major arms supplier to India, I would have said, what are you talking about? Or that Israel is basically a nuclear power. Or that Israel is, Israeli stocks are registered on NASDAQ. I would have said, what is NASDAQ? No, we are in a much, much stronger and better position now than we were at the time. Socially, we did not have the rift that we have now. And it's sad. She warned us against it. But none of us, I never thought I would live to see the day when we would have what's happened to the acting president of Supreme Court and so on and so forth. Look, the last story I want to tell you is this. She was a very emotional woman as well. Very orderly, organized, neat. Somebody asked me once, did you ever see Golda cry? And I said, and how? When? The day the first German ambassador presented his credentials to the president of Israel, 60 years ago, August 8th, 1965. I heard her a number of occasions saying, if and when this happens, I hope that either I'll be dead or sick or out of Israel. But she was alive and well and in Israel, and she was there. The Germans made a mistake. They sent as their first ambassador somebody who fought on the Russian front. The Wehrmacht. The procedure when the ambassador presents credentials is there's a guard of honor, red carpet, and a police or military band. On that day, was a police band. It was a hot summer day, August. There were some demonstrations outside the residence of the president, not where it is now on Jabotinsky, but in Ababanel. I came in early with a group of German reporters. It was a historic occasion. 20 years after the Holocaust, German ambassador presents his group. The ambassador arrives, and I saw Golda, and she said, "What are you doing?" Said, "I'm going to take them out. We'll see what's happening outside." And we stationed ourselves next to the police band. And one of the players, short sleeves, blew numbers on his arm, which means he was in Auschwitz. And the ambassador arrives, and the guard presents arms, and the police band is playing the German national anthem. And the man is playing, and tears are running down his cheeks. He's playing and he's crying. Yeah. I'll never forget that. Ceremony over, I walk back to the residence. She's still there. And she said, "Boy, Maya, what happened?" I told her, and she cried. Look, this is all of us who were in civil service in Israel at the time. It's the ongoing fight between duty and emotions, between reality and history, between what is right and what has to be done. And Golda was a typical product of that thing. An amazing woman, and I was lucky to have had a chance to work under her, even for a brief period of time.
And we've been lucky to hear you. This has been a fantastic I think I speak for everyone when I say this has been an amazing, amazing tour de force from Professor Meron Medzini. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
My fear is he set the bar impossibly high for future, but please do come back in 2 weeks' time. We have former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren, coming to speak about Levi Eshkol. So please come back for that, and good evening, everyone. All right.
I'll tell them that he has written the best book on the Six-Day War.
And as you're aware, Professor Mezzini's recommendations mean a lot, and he says Michael Oren's book on the Six-Day War is the best book on the Six-Day War.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Thank you for coming.
I'm going to take this from you. Sorry, sir.